Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me. I know we were having some technical difficulties, but I do want to get started this morning. Welcome to our quarterly Community Health Advocacy Breakfast Forum. I hope everyone has their coffee or tea or juice and donuts or muffins or biscuits, eggs, etc. We're going to get started post haste. These breakfast forums, as we have shared in the past, are given for all of our community members to share in some of the social determinants of health and why we aren't as healthy as we could be, some of the ways that we can address becoming healthier, and strategies that our community can take to advocate for policies, programs, and funding to better assist us in addressing social determinants of health. We have three very dynamic speakers that are going to be with us this morning. Our topic today is environmental justice. Many times when you share environmental justice, people don't understand what you're talking about. Whether we're talking about preservatives, whether we're talking about waste and recycling, whether we're talking about air quality, the quality of our land and our growing of vegetables and fruits, etc., or whether we're talking about our water. We really want our air, water, and earth to be as healthy as possible so that we ourselves can be as healthy as possible. Many of us remember the movie that was, I believe, back in the 90s, Erin Brockovich, that really talked about environmental toxins and how toxins are going into our water streams and how people are getting very, very sick and dying because of some of those toxins that are in the water. That's how justice issues really are coming about throughout the years, looking at what we are doing ourselves and what businesses are doing to exacerbate negative environmental issues. And so today we've got three speakers that I want to introduce before each of them speak. We're going to start with Amy Densborn, and Amy is with SWACO, and she is a education specialist and is responsible for educating community members about the importance of waste reduction, reuse, recycling, and safe disposal in the Franklin County sanitary landfill. Her passion is for protecting the environment was really spurred by her love for outdoors and desire to protect Mother Earth for future generations. Amy has a background in wildlife biology and environmental sciences, and apart from talking about trash, Amy enjoys growing her own food. Good for you, Amy. Reading and camping with her family. We do share that in common. I'm not growing my own food, and I like to read, but camping is really something that brings a smile to my face. So without further ado, I want to introduce Amy Densborn.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting us from SWACO to speak on the importance of recycling right and making a difference. So as Charlita said, my name is Amy Densborn, and I am SWACO's education specialist. So real quickly, I did want to provide a quick overview for those who maybe aren't familiar with SWACO and what we do here in Franklin County. So SWACO stands for the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, and we are your local solid waste district. We manage the waste stream for all of Franklin County, and we strive to be a leader in environmental sustainability by offering a range of services and programming around diverting materials from the Franklin County sanitary landfill, which we also operate. So this is a quick snapshot of some of the program and services that we offer to the community. We help subsidize recycling programs for communities, nonprofits, schools, and other entities. We host mobile collection events for household hazardous waste and electronic waste. We have over 55 different public recycling drop-off locations for people who maybe don't have access to recycling, but they want to do the right thing and recycle their materials. And then we also host recycling talks. We do a lot of outreach. We'll be out in the public. And then we do offer landfill tours. If anyone's interested in learning more about the operations, of the Franklin County Sanitary Landfill. I highly recommend you take a tour someday when you get a chance. And so really why this is all important, the work that we're doing at SWACO and to lead our community towards a more sustainable future, is because right now we have a diversion rate of about 50%. So what that means is roughly 50% of all the materials that we generate as a community, that's residents and businesses alike, that's being diverted through recycling or composting. And that's really encouraging, considering the national average is right around 34%. But we want to do better. And that's where you guys come into play. That's where all of us come into play, because we do still send about 1 million tons of materials to the landfill every single year. And a lot of those materials, they truly don't belong in the waste stream. They could have been recovered through current recycling and composting markets. So roughly 76% of the materials that make their way to our county's landfill could have been diverted through recycling or composting. So what kinds of materials are we talking about? The number one type of material that we receive at the Franklin County landfill is food scraps. That's equal to about 15% of the total waste stream, which is equal to about 1 million pounds of food waste that we receive daily. So not only is that an environmental concern, but also we think about getting the food, salvaging the food, and getting it into the hands of hungry members of our community. That's really important. And SWACO is working hard with other partners here in the community, with the Central Ohio Food Waste Initiative, to figure out solutions to recover food and make sure that it's going to our community members who need it. The next type of material that we receive the most of that could have been recycled, cardboard boxes. As many of you are probably aware, and many of us shop online, right? E-commerce is becoming more and more prevalent. Most of those products come shipped in cardboard boxes. Amazon Prime boxes, that is taking up more of our waste stream. Absolutely 100% recyclable curbside or at a SWACO drop-off location. So as parents, friends, neighbors, and colleagues, you are in an important position to help make a measurable difference and help lead us towards a more sustainable future. SWACO has set a goal of helping Franklin County reach a 75% diversion rate by 2032. We can't do this alone. We need everybody's help. So how can you get involved? What can you start to do in your everyday life? Knowing what's accepted for recycling and recycling rights will help us get there. So everything that you see on the left-hand side here is accepted for single stream or mixed recycling in Franklin County. So it doesn't matter who your hauler is, whether it's local waste, Rumpke, City of Columbus. If you live in Franklin County, your materials are going to the same place to be processed for recycling. That is the Rumpke Material Recovery Facility. And if you take your materials to a SWACO drop-off location, this information also applies to you, because we take everything to Rumpke's recycling facility as well. So there are 5 categories of materials that you can recycle here in Franklin County. We can do all paper and cardboard. This even includes that pesky junk mail that many of us get that we don't want. Plastic bottles, jugs, and tubs. So tubs is the newest expansion to the list of acceptable materials that just started in January of this year. That is going to be tubs like butter tubs, cottage cheese, yogurt, pudding, a specialty dip of some sort like guacamole or French onion dip. And I'll be happy to go over questions about that later on. All glass bottles and jars are accepted. It does not matter the color. All metal cans. This even includes your aerosol cans. Just remove the tip before you place that in the recycling bin. That ensures, that tells the person working at the recycling facility that you emptied it and you prepped it for recycling. And then carton containers is our 5th type of material that we can recycle. We get a lot of questions about carton containers. All of them are accepted. Juice, milk, milk alternatives, broth, aseptic, they are all accepted for recycling in our program. And then you want to make sure to keep all your items loose when you place them in your recycling bin. You want to make sure they reach their full potential to become a new product, and don't place them in plastic bags. So you can see over here, we have a not accepted category. So this is going to be the commonly thought items that can go in the recycling bin. We call this wish cycling, where people, they aspirationally recycle. They hope that the recycling facility can find a way to sort this out. That is not how recycling works. And so these are all the types of materials that are heavily contaminated in the stream in our community. Plastic and foam food containers are no. Any sort of tangler like an electronic cord or hanger, clothing as well. Again, plastic bags, that's the number one type of material that's put in the recycling stream that really shouldn't be in there. I can tell you plastic bags can go back to the retail stores. So if you have an abundance of them at home, you can take them back to places like Kroger, Giant Eagle, Target, Walmart, Meijer, Kohl's. As you walk into the store, there should be a drop box for you to place all your plastic bags in, and then those are going to get turned into new plastic bags for future shopping trips. And then last but not least, cups. There are no coffee cups, no party cups, no Starbucks or fast food cups at this point in time. So it's a really quick and dirty rundown, and I'll take questions after this presentation on everybody's particular materials. But you know, your efforts to recycle right, they do help to reduce our reliance on the landfill, which is great, right? We can save the land for other resources, but they also contribute to a cleaner environment. So creating goods from recycled content saves energy because it prevents the mining, the transportation, and the processing of that virgin material to make each new item. Each step in the extraction and the processing of virgin materials requires additional energy consumption, which we can completely avoid if we utilize recycled content. Fun fact, did you know that it takes 24 trees to make a ton of paper? Recycled paper not only saves a multitude of trees, but it also creates 70% less pollution. Your efforts ensure that materials can reach their full potential by becoming a new product. Buying recycled products is an important step in completing the life cycle of the recycled items and closing the loop on the recycling process. So by purchasing products with recycled contents, you prevent those from ending up in a landfill and do your part to maintain consumer demand for our recyclables. So we know recycling is good for the environment, but did you also know it creates a more resilient economy? So in Central Ohio alone, the recycling industry supports 372 businesses, 5,000 employees, totaling over $1.3 billion in annual revenue. For every one job in the landfill sector, there are 10 jobs in the recycling industry. So our actions to recycle right help to support those businesses and jobs in the green economy and reduce our reliance on natural resources. These are all things that we can be proud of. So real quick, there are 2 free programs that are provided to all Franklin County residents that I think everyone will find very useful. These are SWACO funded and managed programs. The first one is the Recycle Right search tool. And this is going to be a really useful tool for those of you who are looking, or you're doing a basement clean out, you're moving, you're decluttering in your garage, and you're looking for a way to divert and recycle a hard to recycle material. So I'm thinking about things like cell phone batteries, appliances, light bulbs, you know, an electric lawnmower. For all those random things that you know shouldn't go in your recycling bin, but you're also pretty sure can be recovered and made into something new and shouldn't go in the landfill. So check out recycleright.org, There's over 300 locations for you to take your materials. This is for materials that can be composted, donated, recycled, or safely disposed of. And then if you're on the website, you're having a hard time finding your particular material that you want to divert, please email us or call us. You can email us at info@swaco.org and we will be happy to point you in the right direction. And another really popular and useful program in Franklin County is the Household Hazardous Waste Drop-Off Facility. So this is a program that is for safely disposing of any household hazardous waste. So anything that might be classified as flammable, toxic, hazardous. So I'm thinking about paints, corrosives, helium tanks, batteries, pesticides, old gasoline and oils. You want to bring this to SWACO's permanent household hazardous waste drop-off. It's near the fairgrounds on East 8th Avenue. I encourage you to check the hours of operation before you go there, because it is open Wednesday through Friday, different times. We also host community partnered collection events throughout the year. So we usually do one in the spring and then a couple in the fall. So if you live in a community that typically hosts those, you can always take it to a community sponsored event instead of driving to the permanent facility. So I want to thank everyone for their attention, and I'll now open it up to questions from the audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation, Amy and Chris. Do we have any questions in the chat box?
Typically host those.
Not at the moment.
Okay, I do have a question, Amy. Does SWACO, the Solid Waste Authority of Central Ohio, that's the acronym or the full name of the acronym SWACO, do they partner with community organizations to do educational events?
Absolutely, 100%. Yes.
Great. And again, is that the same info@swaco.org that they would make contact with you?
Yeah, that's kind of our entry to SWACO, and then our awesome administrative assistant, she will send off to the correct party that should take care of it. So it's an easy email to remember, info@swaco.org. If you have a request, if you're interested in applying for a grant, our grant cycle is open right now for any government entity, community, school district. That cycle will close in August, and that's really to help fund any projects and programming on waste reduction and increasing recycling here in our community. So, and absolutely, if you have an outreach event or a community educational request, please email info@swaco.org.
Great. The other question I had before we move on to our next speaker, does SWACO take any materials from healthcare organizations? I know that there are some hazardous waste that must be disposed of properly, but other kinds of medical supplies and equipment.
That's a great question. And I'm not familiar with exactly what healthcare facilities bring their waste to our landfill, but what I can tell you is if it's non-hazardous material, if it's considered like municipal solid waste, so the waste that would be generated, like for example, in a cafeteria or in a hallway, for example, that would make its way to the Franklin County landfill, because we're the only municipal solid waste facility in Franklin County. And so we're receiving, all the waste for our community, all of Franklin County. And so if it's non-hazardous waste, I could almost 100% tell you that it would be making its way to our community's landfill.
Great. And then another question, we're all trying to be safe during the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly those of us in the healthcare arena are trying our best to get people vaccinated. But in the meantime, and to protect others, for those who aren't vaccinated and for those who want to ensure that they're doing their part to reinforce protecting others, we're wearing masks. Many of us have the hospital masks that are kind of paper-like, and then some of us are wearing cloth masks. I'm seeing more and more of those paper masks on the ground in the sewer systems, etc. Are those also recyclable?
So they are a hard to recycle type of material. What I can tell you is they are not accepted in Rumpke's curbside program, so you should not place them in your blue bin at home. But there are specialty recycling programs out there. One company is called TerraCycle. They have these fantastic zero waste boxes that you can purchase, and you're seeing more hospitals and other medical centers putting these in their offices. So people that have that disposable mass can drop it into this zero waste box, and then that can be made into a new product through TerraCycle. So there is an option, but it does cost it does cost a fee to buy one of those boxes.
Great. If we don't have any more questions at this time, we'll move on to our next speaker, and then we'll take questions for everyone at the end of the presentations.
Shirley, I have one more question.
Oh, go right ahead.
Please repeat the 2032 goal and explain briefly.
Made into a new product through TerraCycle. So there is a. Sorry, I was having some hearing myself talk right in the background. Yes, so the 2032 goal, SWACO has set a goal of helping Franklin County reach a 75% diversion rate by that year, okay? And so right now our diversion rate is 50%. We have one of the highest diversion rates here in the Midwest, something to be really proud of. Everyone deserves a pat on the back for that great work. We have the second highest diversion rate behind Minneapolis, Minnesota. Okay, but we're striving to do even better for our environment and for our community's health. And so we're looking to increase that diversion rate by 25% over the next, how many years? 11 years? 2032, it'll be here before you know it.
Thank you very much, Amy. And if there are no other questions, Chris? There must not be. Yeah, we're going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Mariam Hussein. Dr. Hussein is a hematology oncology fellow at The Ohio State University James Comprehensive Care Center. She graduated from the Ohio State University College of Medicine and completed a residency in internal medicine. Mariam has been working on community service projects in the Columbus area and abroad for the past 10 years. As a board member of the national nonprofit IMANA, Islamic Medical Association of North America, she has been working on public health education and creating domestic campaigns for climate change, food insecurity. She has also started a blog on science and faith called Science Juma. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Dr. Hussein. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Excellent. No, that was perfect, Senator Darius. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to meet everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of the OCCA, the Ohio Clinicians for Climate Action. So before I start, I just want to acknowledge that the land on which I work at The Ohio State University, is the ancestral and contemporary territory of multiple peoples, the Shawnee, the Potawatomi, the Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandot, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. I also want to acknowledge that certainly I could speak to some health issues, thankfully, as a physician, but I know that there are others that can speak to environmental justice more than me and better than me. And so I stand here as an ally on this issue, and I hope to elevate more representative voices in this area. So as a physician, usually when people come in to the hospital or the clinic, they come in very sick, and it can sometimes be hard to just understand what's going on without going back, without getting a history of what is exactly going on. So we're here today talking about connections between environment and the health, right? And so going back, what exactly are we talking about? Amy did a great job talking about, what are we doing in terms of our current practices, but looking at it really from a bird's eye view beyond that. This is a photo of the Earth from the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, as the crew was traveling to the moon. And one of the most amazing things about this picture is that it actually got almost an entire view of the southern polar ice cap that you can see there at the bottom. And I'm sure many of you have heard the term in some marches that there's no planet B, right? And so this is the only planet we got, and it's affectionately known as the blue marble because of this picture. So some of you have seen some form or another of this picture, right? All the different sources of greenhouse gas emissions. We see things about agriculture, making of plastics and petrochemicals, mining, transportation, landfills, like Amy mentioned, thawing of polar ice caps, and things like the permafrost. But what does that actually, when we talk about the environment and health, how does that actually relate, right? Why does that contribute to climate change? And so this is a picture of the sun shining over the Earth's horizon through the two most bottom layers of the atmosphere. Now, the atmosphere is remarkably thin for as big as the Earth is. It's surprisingly only 60 miles long, right, from the surface to once you leave the atmosphere. I was born in Lima, Ohio. So to get up into space, it's a shorter amount of distance than me to go back to where I was born, right, for here from to Columbus. So why does this matter, this small, thin piece of atmosphere? Now, when we get the sun's energy, right, about half of it gets absorbed by the Earth, but about a quarter of it gets absorbed by the atmosphere. And there's this constant interplay between gases and the sun's radiation that comes in, absorbs certain amount of energy. That's been going on for millennia. But greenhouse gases, so carbon dioxide, methane that gets emitted from landfills, for example, nitrous oxide, water vapor, they all can block certain types of energies, including the sun's, and absorb it. And then when they do that, they either hold on to it or they radiate it back into space. But then when you get too much burning of greenhouse gases, too much of that builds up, the balance gets shifted. And then you end up having too much greenhouse gases in a very small little piece of area. And then you end up holding on to more energy than the Earth can absorb, and then it can throw back into space. And then you get this phenomenon of increased temperatures, increased energy, increased heat. And that's kind of what is leading to all of this. Just leading to this phenomenon of why we're having so much of this buildup, right, of energy, of global warming. So this is based on data from gas bubbles and ice cores from Antarctica. And it was analyzed by the US Global Change Research Program. And actually the reason I bring it up too is because researchers from the Byrd Polar Research Center right here in Columbus, they contributed to this work too. And as you can see, these trapping cycles are normal, right? A lot of people will tell you, hey, this is just normal stuff that's happening in the Earth's cycle. But again, as somebody who needs to know the history of patients, why things are happening, we have to know why things are happening to the Earth and what's wrong. And so ever since the Industrial Revolution, these levels have continued to increase and they haven't come down. And that's the most important part. This is obviously a little dated data from 2008, but you can see that in the yellow and green dots there, that the projection of what the amount of carbon dioxide that we're building up in the atmosphere, if we don't stop our current consumption of fossil fuels and our current practices, it's just going to keep going higher and higher. So purely based on scientific facts, right? Not about emotion, religion, anything else, politics. The climate crisis is real. It's not a hoax. It's certainly happening, but unfortunately, it's become a politicized issue, right? The reason I like this this meme and this image is that the irony, right, is that we can actually make the world a better place, right? And it wouldn't be for nothing. And it would be better for health, for business, exactly like Amy said, just the boom in green energy business that's going on, for the economy, and ultimately for equity. So how does this relate to equity, right? I mean, we're all on the same planet. We should all be feeling the side effects of climate change, right? And we're probably all contributing the same, you might think. But that's not exactly the case. And this is why environmental justice is such an important issue to address. So this is a look at the per capita energy consumption in countries around the world. And this is as of 2021. And you can see that the countries that are in the most red side, the redder countries, use more energy. And then as you get more towards the violet blue end of the spectrum, those are the countries that use less energy. And you can kind of see that there's almost this line that I put in here, this red line there, that there's almost like a divide, it seems like. So this is what's known as the global north-south divide. It's a phenomenon that obviously exists globally, but it also exists within countries, within cities, just like Columbus. And these divides that have been created by highways production, that's been created by zoning laws, housing rules, etc. So why does this matter? Let's say even if the global south isn't using as much energy consumption, why does that matter? So it matters because when you look at the impacts of what climate change is having and where. And so there's this climate demography vulnerability index, the CDVI. And again, kind of in this way, a little bit much like the last slide, that the more red a country is, the higher impacts they have of climate change and the higher that they're vulnerable to climate change impacts. The more blue you are, the less impact you're having of climate change issues. So you can see that the global south, which is not using as much energy consumption compared to the global north, they are feeling the brunt of climate change impacts like hurricanes, cyclones, and as they're called in other parts of the world, wildfires. It's not just California, but Australia, in the Amazon, drought, of course, COVID-19, right? And so human conflict and war, per the usual, right? So this is something that, again, it's a justice issue. People who are not contributing to a problem are feeling the brunt of the effects of it. And this ultimately all, again, relates to environmental justice. So this is a beautiful drawing by the activist Ricardo Levins Morales. So environmental justice is not a new phenomenon. Some people have dated it back to even 1982, when a predominantly African-American community in Warren County, North Carolina, led a civil disobedience campaign against plans for a toxic dump site. And so what is environmental justice? So per the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, it's the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So what does, so this, there's a lot of, you know, to take in with that, but so this image I like, it's from We Act, this environmental justice organization in New York. And so this image kind of shows what current policies are in practice. A schoolyard next to a power plant, a fossil burning power plant. So in the US, due to a very long real history of racist housing and industrial policies, African Americans are 75% more likely than their white counterparts to live in fence line communities close to oil and gas facilities polluting the air, just like in this picture. And there's a staggering fact as well, too, that African Americans also breathe air with 38% more pollution than their white counterparts. And so just tying it all in together as well, so locally and globally as well, too, that the majority of the 10 countries hit hardest by climate-related extreme weather in the last 10 years are also on the list of the world's least developed nations. So the bottom line is that poor families and people of color have done the least to create the fossil fuel economy and the crisis, and yet you're the ones paying the greatest price, especially when it comes to health. So the CDC had noted that the counties that are most vulnerable to disaster situations, specifically in the United States. And what you can see here is that in the 10 counties that are rated the most vulnerable, on average, the population is about 81% of persons of color. And we didn't see this more strikingly than with the COVID-19 pandemic. You can just see here that even just with deaths, right? Even though we all were, this was a global pandemic, Indigenous peoples, African Americans, Pacific Islanders, and Latinos faced higher rates of COVID-19 deaths compared to their other counterparts. A lot of this, some people attribute to air pollution and specifically particulate matter that is released in the burning of fossil fuels. And other issues as well, underlying respiratory issues. It's not a genetic thing. I just want to say that this is not a genetic phenomenon. It's not hereditary. This is actually institutional environmental damage happening to people on a daily basis. Right there. Oh, I think I missed a slide there. But so what does this actually mean then for Ohio, right? Obviously, that's what we're here about. We love here, this obviously our home. And so how does this actually impact us, let's say? So like how Senator Tavares was mentioning in the beginning, that let's talk about water, for example. And I'll go through this quickly just for the sake of time. So please let me know if anybody has any questions. This is based on a report from the Ohio EPA back in 2016, that over the last 50 years, just 50 years, the average annual precipitation in most of the Midwest increased by about 5 to 10%. But rainfall during the 4 wettest days of the year had increased about 35%. And the amount of water flowing in most streams during the worst timing of floods during the year has increased more than 20%. So that basically means that there's more precipitation going on. It's happening in a shorter periods of time. So it's almost just like these extreme incidences of precipitation happening, and then more flooding is happening as a result. So what does that mean? That people who live near the river, let's say, people who are near water lines with that, these people end up getting more exposed to flooding, but that also comes then with industrial toxins, because a lot of these power plants, a lot of these factories end up being built near the river. And then what they leave, so people end up getting exposed to toxins with that from metallurgical warehouses, chemical manufacturing. There were actually a few petitions going on to try to prevent some petrochemical plants from being built, more plants from being built near the water. And so it's just a very pervasive issue. So it's not just flooding, but it's all the stuff that comes with flooding as well too. And this is the picture right here is of Marietta, Ohio as well too. The other thing I just want to mention as well too is that even with lead, that you don't always have to be near the river, but even within urban areas as well too, that for piping, not have lower standards of when to check it, make sure there's no lead contamination in the water. It's not just an issue in Flint. Flint just brought it to the national mind frame, right? But this was an issue going on in Columbus even as well too. Just a quick other note about water as well is that for those who are living near the Lake Erie region, algal blooms, right? So a lot of industrial runoff, that it was so bad in 2014 that Toledo had to ban drinking and cooking with tap water because of the amount of the fertilizer that had run off into Lake Erie, and then ended up creating this horrific algal bloom that was really super toxic to the local residents there. And the reason why that ends up being a big issue as well too, not just for runoff, but as well that there's usually Lake Erie and the Great Lakes get covered with ice for a lot of the during that icy season. And so there's also been a less amount of ice-free season in the past few years. And you can see that in this picture, usually the entire lake is covered, and a good part of it hasn't been covered because of increased temperatures. What about food? This is Waterman Farm, for those who are familiar here, at least looking out into the city. So when we talk about increased heat and increased conditions, and we talk about flooding, a lot of farmers this year were suffering a lot because of their crop yields. Either they had planted for the entire season, and a lot of that got damaged because of this excess precipitation that had happened in a short amount of time. But then as well, when you get too hot summers and you can't plant, then you get drought-like conditions. So yields for corn, for soybeans, those were also affected as well too. And so let's just say, these farmers, obviously, you think on a broad scale that everybody gets affected by this if farmers can't produce the foods that we need to eat. But again, food insecurity and food deserts relating to the injustice issue is that those people in our community who are already vulnerable, already exposed to food insecurity, those inequities increase even more when you can't even, when your entire food access to food source is limited as well too. And some of this also relates to zoning laws as well too. Another aspect of the food phenomenon here is that per the CDC, because of zoning laws, certain businesses, including fast food, they've been allowed to thrive in certain areas, particularly lower income areas. And then you don't have a lot of these grocery stores available. And so these are laws that we can change if we want to. And then the last point I want to bring up too is about air quality. So this is actually a picture here of in Ohio. And so as we get more and more hot days, I'm sure you guys are seeing a lot more about air quality levels, right? And that, maybe trying to not drive as much during these particular areas. Higher temperatures can cause a lot of issues when it comes to air pollution. So even just with increased temperatures, people get risk for heat stroke, dehydration that can affect your cardiovascular and your nervous systems. people who are disadvantaged more so than others who are already at risk for some of these conditions, they're at increased risk then for furthering of these conditions when you have increased temperatures. Again, if you don't have access to utilities, for example, and for air conditioning, you're at even increased risk then of suffering some of these effects as well too. Columbus is like other metropolitan areas where we're an urban heat island. And so because of the concrete, less green space, it just end up being increased air temperatures. And then again, when you talk about particulate matter, 2.5, that's released from a lot of these coal-fired power plants, air pollution levels, the increased risk of asthma for young children, especially nationwide. The areas around Nationwide Children's Hospital are some of the highest of asthma rates in the county. COPD, lung cancer, which is something, I end up seeing a lot during my training. And I know I'm coming up on time. And so these are just a very,
don't worry about it, Dr. Hussein. We still
okay.
have enough time for Leah.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So I was just going to say that, of course, there are several health problems, unfortunately, relate to this stuff. I just mentioned the top three, at least right now. The CDC has this very helpful image here that talks about all the impacts that you can have from the climate crisis, not least of all to mention mental health. And we've seen that more happen, more of an issue than with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Being locked down, kids feeling the brunt of this. This is something that is another phenomenon created by climate change as well too. Housing is going to becomes an issue as well too. When you talk about, do we have safe housing for people, especially as the weather gets hotter? The other really big important thing about this too is the migration aspect. Is that some of you may already know people who either lived in the South when Hurricane Katrina happened, people in the West with wildfires that are moving inland. Columbus is a big hotspot, right, for people to move to. And so when you have more people closer together, housing is an issue, food's an issue, health becomes an issue. So it's a lot of these issues, other factors that it's not just about the earth becoming hotter, but all of these indirect impacts that end up happening. I should have said this in the beginning. I meant to say in the beginning, usually my talks are the more depressing ones because there's all this, stuff about what is bad, what is going on. But, and I know it's heavy and it can be scary and a lot to think with, but I like to deal with stuff with humor sometimes. You got to laugh, otherwise you cry, right? And so the reason why I can be humorous about this and the reason I can be have some levity is because there are things that we can do. We have practices in place that are leading us down a certain direction, but we can get out of this because we've created those laws, we created those policies. For example, Amy's told you a bunch of great ideas, right, about recycling, and that there is a great organization I'm a part of, the Ohio Clinicians for Climate Action, that organizes clinicians like myself to get more involved in advocacy, to talk to legislators, so people can hear from us on the ground as to what we're seeing when it comes to our communities. There's a lot of, through not just from OCCA, but other laws that are going on. For example, there's House Bill 7 that would include long-term funding for H2 Ohio, a program to try to reduce toxic algae, like I mentioned, for like in Lake Erie, for example. There was House Bill 360 that would require the Facilities Construction Commission that when they're building new schools to also include water dispensing stations so that there could be room for water bottles. So reducing plastic waste and encouraging more water consumption and not sodas and all that. And so there are a bunch of, laws that come in every day, that we could advocate for. So if you are a clinician, please join. If you are a patient, tell your doctor about OCCA, tell them to join so that they can hear from others, stories from all around Ohio. And then one thing I'll leave you all with as well too is that, so what can we do? And like I said, we could do a lot of things. So Amy had mentioned, food waste, trying to divert. So really taking that to heart. That agriculture is one of the biggest impacts on climate change because of methane production and deforestation. When you talk about environmental justice, if you can divert that food waste to help, buying less food in the first place, or maybe donating food, right, to those who need it more, you can address that issue. Greening travel, right, using less cars if possible. possible, biking more, all that just ends up decreasing air pollution, again, for those people who live in more compacted areas who get more exposed to air pollution. Reducing your energy use when you can, right? Or advocating for the facilities you're in that, hey, how can we switch to more energy saving strategies? That's what we're trying to do in healthcare, because healthcare is the #1 energy consumer in Ohio. You can't turn the lights off in a hospital because emergencies happen 24 hours a day. But how can we end up getting energy from safer, healthier options versus just always fossil fuel plants? And just always speak up. You never know how important your voice is until you speak it. So reaching out to your legislators, reaching out to OCCA, just getting involved, it makes all the difference. So thank you guys. Thank you guys again so much. I really appreciate it. Again, I know it was a lot. It was rapid fire, but we can do a lot to change things. Trust me. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hussein, and thank you for some powerful slides that you shared with us. I do want to ask you, are those going to be available that we can share with our listening and viewing audience?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can send it over to whenever you like.
Great. If you would send those to Chris,
Absolutely.
that would be very helpful.
Happy
Chris,
to.
do we have any questions in the chat box?
Not at this time.
Well, I've got a couple questions, Dr. Hussein. The first one goes to, you mentioned the city that started this environmental justice work. Was that Defiance? Was that in Warren, South Carolina? I wasn't absolutely sure the state.
Yes, I want to say North Carolina, but let me
North
just
Carolina,
confirm
okay.
that. Yeah, I could have very easily have said North instead of said, yeah, North Carolina.
Okay, great, great. And then the issue around coal-fired power plants and other plants being built, constructed near water. Is that pretty normal throughout the world, or is it more prevalent in the United States?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in terms of, to be totally transparent, I know about for a few countries. I'm not sure if it's all over the world, but I wouldn't be surprised. But usually you need to have a cooling mechanism when you're just for the factory to run and to be able to move the coal through and all that. So that's why water is usually a resource that people need by. And then because, we had a deregulation of a lot of environmental regulations through different presidencies, not just one person in particular, but people would just throw all their dump into the water source because then you wouldn't have to put into the ground. So it's for a couple of those reasons that a lot of these factories, the cooling mechanism and then easy waste removal for rivers, locations.
Great. And then another question that I did have for you was around the issue of advocacy. You seem to be very involved as a clinician, and I certainly appreciate that as a former senator, that we need more advocates. And you mentioned that those patients and community members can encourage their clinicians to become a part of the advocacy organization that you're a part of. Are there other ways that you would suggest the listening and viewing audience who aren't clinicians get involved?
Yeah, that's a great point. So there are thankfully a lot of organizations, right, that are actually involved in this effort as well too. So I can certainly send a list as well, right, in terms of that. But for example, there's so the OCCA is actually a part of the Ohio Environmental Council, and so they also take regular community members. You don't have to be a physician for that. As you join their mailing list, they'll send petitions, at other advocacy items, so you can be up to date with certain advocacy agendas. There's a Sierra Club. There's a national. I always mix up the two names, but it's the National Resources Defense Council. That's another active chapter here in Ohio. And then honestly, just even there's also Citizens Climate Lobby as well. That they're a huge part. Climate Reality Project, which is where I got a lot of my slides from. And so they do a training if you ever want to become like a climate reality leader and do training in your community. communities. So they're actually, like I said, a bunch of groups, and through them or even individually, just reaching out to your local state senators, right? You don't even have to call your federal ones, but as you very well know, there are that calling your state ones and just saying like, hey, I don't like this bill. And it can be as simple as a 2-minute call. And I've made a bunch of those. It's very simple. You have no idea, because when a lot of these legislators, right, they know what they know because of advisors that come to them, right? And so if you have 5 people saying, hey, I don't want something in this bill, and they've never heard anything about this bill, they're like, hey, maybe I need to vote no on this, right? And so you'd be surprised how that can work sometimes.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you for your advocacy, and we'll take more questions, Chris, unless there are any questions in the chat box right now.
No, there are none right now.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll take more questions at the end. And then I want to introduce now Leah Hudnall, who serves as the director of the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, which is guided by an advisory committee of the Ohio environmental advocates and leaders whose charge is to make investments in Black, Indigenous, and people of color organizations in Ohio, working at the intersection of racial justice and climate action. It was launched with seed funding and support from the George Gunn Foundation, Energy Foundation, and the Cleveland Foundation. The OCJF advances accessible community education and community listening efforts centered on creating a sustainable, equitable future for Ohio. In 2020, Leah founded the Legacy Perspective, a civic consulting firm that promotes community-centered strategies to champion the voices of those who are most dependent on and affected by the decisions of local government, philanthropy, and nonprofit organizations. She is among her professional journey. Leah has served as a program officer at St. Luke's Foundation of Cleveland and as a fellow at the George Gunn Foundation. She began her career at Key Bank Foundation and has held roles at the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office and the Center for Arts Inspired Learning. Leah, you probably know a friend of mine, Marcia Egbert, who was at who's at the George Gunn Foundation.
Yes, I do.
Well, it is good to meet you, and thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who is joining in with us this morning. We've had 2 great and very dynamic presentations, and so I hope I don't let us down as we close out today. As you heard, I'm Leah D. Hudnall, Director of the Ohio Climate Justice Fund. Before I dive into what our acronym OCJF is, I wanted to give you a little background about me. I am not coming to you from Central Ohio. I am coming to you from the city of Cleveland, where I'm a 4th-generation homeowner and a 3rd-generation graduate of our public school system here in Cleveland. Many of the content that we've heard this morning centers on historic disinvestment and racism, which is usually what powers environmental injustices that we've all heard about today. And so I wanted to just give you a little background on where the Ohio Climate Justice Fund came from and what inspired it. So, as we were dealing with the pandemic and the onset of the coronavirus disease, we also saw 2020 as a huge year for a racial reckoning in America. To me, every year is the year for a racial reckoning until we move closer to progress. But last year, I think we all can agree that community organizations, global corporate companies, across to faith-based institutions were all trying to do a better job of understanding how we got here. During that time, several philanthropic leaders across the country made a commitment to give beyond their usual 5% spending rate as required by the IRS. One of those foundations was the George Gunn Foundation. And so what happened was, at what I will say is the last minute, this funding institution had a pot of money, if you will, that they had to decide how to spend. And what inspired John Mitterholzer, who runs the environmental docket at the George Gunn Foundation, was the idea of funding at the intersection of racial justice, climate, and democracy. And from there, the Ohio Climate Justice Fund was born. We have, over the last few months, several months, I should say, we've done a lot of work to really ramp up with a public launch and start announcing our first cohort of grantees. And so this fund is an intermediary fund that does a few things all at once. We are a participatory fund, which means the U.S. Energy Foundation, the Cleveland Foundation, and the George Gunn Foundation are not making the decisions. A 10-person advisory board is. We also only fund organizations who are either led by a person of color as the executive director, president, head of the community group, or have a board that identifies as majority persons of color. So if you have a 10-person board, 6 of those individuals need to identify as a person of color. Also, our funds are specific to hosting community sessions across Ohio to engage everyday Ohioans, not those who are usually engaged in environmental conversations, on what their impressions around clean energy and climate are. So we do a lot of community listening, community education. We're trying to put our money where our mouth is in terms of who we fund and organizations that have historically not received philanthropic dollars. And also we are sharing power out of the institution and into the hands of those who are environmental leaders and have just as much expertise as any philanthropic program officer or director. So we have 3 pillars. Many of them I've kind of explained already. We also follow the James principles for democratic organizing. Our first pillar is that we share decision-making power. The second is that we want to hear and learn from the lived experience of Ohioans. And the third is that we intentionally fund organizations led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we're really proud of those values and those pillars, and we try every day as we make decisions to stick closely to them. This is our advisory board that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to go pretty quickly, but again, these slides are, most of them are public. We have a webpage that I'll alert you to in a few minutes, and you can learn all about them. Their bios are published, and we're really excited to work with this great group of folks.
Hey there, I just want to chime in. I know a couple of your advisors, Leo and Jocelyn.
Yes.
Wonderful group of individuals, and it's really good to see a diverse, very diverse board of advisors.
Yes, you are not the first person who has made that connection. This is one of the most, if I just take that pleasure of saying, one of the most diverse advisory boards that I think you'll find in an initiative in Ohio, especially an environmental initiative. So quite frankly, many times, even myself personally, I did not believe that the environmental sector was one to which I belong. Historically, it has been marketed to a specific subset of individuals, and I think that has been very purposeful. But as you've heard with all the presentations, and as you'll hear through mine, communities of color, people of color, Black folks, Latinx folks, our Asian brothers and sisters, we bear the brunt of the decisions that many corporations and historically white institutions have made when it comes to the environment, but we have not been included. And so that is why this funding is specific to organizations of color, and that is why we're sticking to those principles. This is more about our funders and our partners. And we've talked about them enough, but the U.S. Energy Foundation based in California, the George Gunn Foundation here in Cleveland, the Cleveland Foundation again, Power Clean Future Ohio, which I would love to advise all of you to learn more about, and then Growth Opportunity Partners, which is a CDFI based here in Cleveland as well. So as you heard from Dr. Hussein, I think I'm going to reiterate a lot of the points that have already been made, but this is one of my favorite quotes: pollution, much like wealth, is not distributed equally across our country. And then you have an image here that starkly gives you a contrast between what, pollution and polluted air can do to a skyline, or if you were to have an aerial view of a city, just to give you a visual representation of what we're talking about here. When we talk about racism as a public health crisis, I think many people like to talk around the issue. For me, I've been dealing with social determinants of health for a very long time here. I've spent about the last 5 years directly in local philanthropy here in Cleveland. And I find myself trying to explain the concept of social determinants, right? So as Dr. Hussein said earlier, it's not a hereditary issue. It is racism. And so that if you don't have access to education, you don't have access to quality and clean air, neighborhoods, et cetera, outcomes will be different. Here in Cleveland, there's it's a pretty aged now documentary around life expectancy and how a neighborhood here called Huff in the heart of the core city of Cleveland and a suburb, Lyndhurst, are 2 miles away, but the life expectancy is about 20 years apart, just based on the environmental factors, not just the environment, but the environmental factors at large from one area to the next, anything from education to social emotional learning, et cetera. And so here, when we talk about pollution, Black people, other people, period, that are not white are 4 times more likely to die from exposure to pollution. When you talk about COPD, when you talk about asthma, all of these things, and it was a great write-up in the Washington Post that we have sourced here, but I would encourage everyone to read it. It's pretty long, but every word is worth it. But I can't express enough just how much of an issue this really is, and usually because we're not looking and thinking about air quality in communities that have been disinvested. It's the silent killer, if you will. When you are housing insecure and you're worrying about, finding stable housing, when you don't have equal access to employment opportunities and you're trying to find fair pay and a fair wage, you're trying to find quality education or childcare for your family, the least likely thing you're looking up is what the air quality is in a zip code. But it is very impactful to your quality of life. So this is a very long quote, again, from that Washington Post article. But many of us, we all should know about historic redlining. It had a number of effects that still exist, are intact today based on historic racism. But one of the things it did is what it marked was, Black communities or Latinx communities, because they were only allowed to be and buy homes in certain areas across the United States. And so what happened in those communities? We start seeing plants, we start seeing factories, they're releasing emissions and pollutants into the air, and the neighborhoods that we all know and love, that we call home, are killing us. And so again, I would ask us to think about the full picture when we talk about racism as a public health crisis. So again, inequitable costs, we heard this point made already. We are doing the least, but we are experiencing the most of the burden when it comes to energy costs, when it comes to pollutants, et cetera. And so I don't want to harp too much, so I'll skip around. A lot of what we're trying to do with the Ohio Climate Justice Fund is, even if you're an individual and you're not a 501c3 organization who can apply for funding, we want to make sure that when you engage with us, you leave knowing a little bit more than when you came. And a lot of people, especially in Ohio, I know for myself, I came from a family that ate off of a pension from a plant, right? I have a grandfather who can tell you a lot of iffy stories about where some of the waste went into a certain lake that then caught on fire, that, and so we try to break down, we're not trying to demonize energy sources, but we're trying to, if I'm speaking for myself, my grandfather put his life at risk, his health at risk. Many of the people that he worked with in a local plant here in Cleveland decades ago, they are no longer with us, right? And so what I tell people is, what if we could introduce an industry that doesn't require you to physically sacrifice your health, right? You can have economic opportunity, which is what many of the coal plants were for Black Americans who were migrating north. They came here for economic opportunity. But there was a sacrifice, a very significant sacrifice. And so now we're in a new age, and I don't want my son to have to go work at XYZ plant. I want him to be able to be a solar technician, or, to be able to do things where he can provide a living, but he's not sacrificing his health. And so we try to teach folks about non-renewable and renewable sources so they can start to come with us on this journey. This again talks more about clean energy and jobs and the opportunity, what some of those sectors look like, and the level of skill that you might need to enter. And again, I think we all see the writing on the wall. This is where investment is going. Probably in 10 years from now, we'll all be driving electric vehicles. There'll be charging stations in every ghetto and every suburb. But right now, we are still trying to get folks informed. And why are we trying to do that? because we want to make sure that when you come into a Black neighborhood in Cleveland, that the people who are installing all of this technology and all of the things that will boost this new economy, that they actually are from the neighborhood and they were given the opportunity. We have a lot of stories here in Cleveland where you might see an all-white team from Dayton installing solar in a Black neighborhood, while the Black men that need jobs, Black men and women that need jobs, sit and watch. Why is that? How can we start branching out for those educational opportunities now, so when the opportunity is available, we're ready? As you can see, less than 10% of the clean energy jobs right now are held by Black workers. That's a problem. We won't be able, as the Ohio Climate Justice Fund alone, to change that number for Ohio. But if we partner up with many of the partners we've heard today, and we all are intentional, I think we can have a huge impact. So why are we investing in only organizations led by people of color? Well, it's probably obvious, but if not, the Kresge Foundation released a report last year or in 2019 that talked about all of the foundations that have an environmental docket or do climate grant making. And again, it's very hard to get a solid number because, you know, with social determinants and things like that, it's easy to make grants that aren't considered environmental grants that probably are or should be. But of the roughly 1 billion that they were able to tally, only 1.3% of those went to organizations who had BIPOC leadership and were considered BIPOC-led environmental justice organizations. 1.3 of $1 billion. So this is why, and again, we don't have $1 billion as the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, but we can start to do our part. And I believe that if we model success and we model equitable grant making, then we can encourage other funding partners and entities to take a look at themselves as well. This is a great quote that we've been using for the Climate Justice Fund. When we try to combat climate change without centering the communities that bear the cost, we all lose. When we bring those community voices into the fold and shift the decision-making power to them, we all win. So again, we have some very high values to stay true to. So rounding out the end of my presentation, what are we actually doing when we're awarding grants? Well, the organizations who are applying to the Climate Justice Fund, usually if there are any grant seekers or grant writers on this live stream, you know that when you apply for a grant, you also submit deliverables that you hope will be approved by your grant making partner. But with the Ohio Climate Justice Fund, everyone has the same deliverables. Host 3 community listening sessions. The title of those sessions and the campaign is called Listen, Lead, Share. It's our community listening model that we're rolling out as a part of this fund. And it's really just a way to hold grassroots organizations and community organizations for them to host listening sessions with everyday Ohioans, not Ohioans who are involved in these conversations every day. I don't know about you, but no one in my life wakes up talking about the Public Utilities Commission. No one in my life wakes up talking about the commissioner scandal. No one tells me, oh, I have to pay my utility bill. We call them a light bill, right? You know, I don't hear that language unless I'm logging in to work with professional partners. So we want to bring a really accessible conversation into community. We want to start to tear down those barriers because most of the environmental regime in Ohio is white. And that's just it, they're white. And so Ohio is not though. So if we want to say that we want a clean and equitable future for Ohio, then it needs to be all of Ohio and not just those who have been afforded the privilege to be in certain rooms in certain spaces. And so when you apply to the Climate Justice Fund, you can apply for between $15,000 to $30,000 to host a Listen, Lead, Share session. It can be in person, digital. It's between 45 minutes to an hour. There's a presentation already created, so every host will ask the same questions. But as we know, every conversation will be different. We're really excited about this. The conversations are open to all Ohio residents. So at the end, I'm going to give you our website. Please follow us on social media. Keep checking our webpage. We're going to eventually start posting where you can join some of these sessions in your community. Again, if it's digital and you're in Columbus, but you want to go down to Cincinnati virtually via Zoom, we welcome you as well. And we look forward to the feedback as well from the conversation. Again, this is more about the grant opportunity, what you would do in order to fulfill the obligations of the grant. So it's a small grant, but there's big impact. One, we are a cohort-based model. So we just had a grant application deadline that passed on May 19th. And so that'll be our first cohort of organizations. We haven't publicly announced them, but I can tell you there's 9 organizations totaling over $230,000 in total investment. We'll also have a second deadline towards the end of this summer, early fall. So I would encourage everyone to stay connected with us because we'll be announcing that second deadline as well. And so what will happen is we also will have in-kind resources in terms of executive director roundtables, a digital marketing training, just things that many emerging nonprofits and grassroots nonprofits can't afford to commission on their own. And if they are engaged with Climate Justice Fund, my thinking and the thinking of our partners and our board is how can we be of service beyond just $15,000 to $30,000? That's not in the grand scheme of a nonprofit a lot of money, but the impact that we think cohorts can make with one another. We're already seeing some excitement because applicants are talking about the opportunity from, to connect from Lima with folks they've never met in Columbus that are doing the exact same work, but there's been no one to bring them together. Same thing from Cincinnati to Cleveland, et cetera. And we have pretty good geographical diversity of our first cohort. So I'm really excited for you all to receive the press release in coming weeks. Grants will be awarded to the organizations who fit this criteria. Again, it's just talking about the geographical and cultural diversity that we have goals around demonstrated ability to organize and have trust built up in the community in which they serve. One of our application questions is, if we were to ask community about you, what would they say? It's really important for us to know that the applicant and maybe the person that's awarded funds has a solid reputation in their community. Because it doesn't do us any good if you say you're great and we're asking you to host community conversations and no one shows up because they don't trust you. So we want to get a good read on that. So again, our webpage is ohioclimatejusticefund.org. We are a sister campaign with Power Clean Future Ohio. So when you go to our webpage, you will see it embedded within Power Clean Future Ohio. I encourage all of you to go learn more about both of our efforts, to stay connected with us. If there's any questions that you have around eligibility for your organization or an organization you know, I'm always open to answer any questions or also host virtual meet and greets via Zoom. So I thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you so very, very much. Yes, that was a very, very powerful presentation. And Ms. Hudnall, Leah, I want to thank you for also sharing the powerful family stories. That's not only impactful, but it also shows the grounding that your family has in the Cleveland area. So thank you very, very much. And a shout out to our public school systems as a proud product of the Columbus Public Schools here in Central Ohio. Chris, do we have any questions before I ask some questions?
Yes. What has the Ohio Climate Justice Fund done to specifically advise SWACO and other organizations represented on the panel this morning?
Yeah, so this is my first time meeting both of the presenters today. So we've done nothing to advise them, but we welcome partners from all across. And again, this time last year, the Ohio Climate Justice Fund didn't exist, right? So we're less than a year old as an initiative, and we have a lot of partnering to do. So we're really excited about that.
Are there other questions, Chris?
Not at this time.
Great. Well, I think both of the presenters that are left, I know our presenter from SWACO, Amy, had to leave, but I think both of you provide the synergy necessary in the state of Ohio to do lots of things, particularly for the BIPIC or the Black, Indigenous, people of color communities throughout the state of Ohio. Are there some specifics that either one of you would suggest as a first step for individuals in our community to become a part of this advocacy effort around environmental justice?
Yes, there's so many first steps. It's hard for me to put them all into a listicle, if you will. but really understanding what's happening in your city where you pay taxes, where you know the fabric of that town. Again, Power Clean Future Ohio is a cities-based campaign to get cities to sign on to climate action plans. It's not as many times we found resistance with statewide efforts, but the goal is, if you can build consensus amongst cities and townships, that you can have a real power base. So one, check to see if your city is a PCFO city. If it's not, call your council person, call your mayor, your city leader, and have a conversation. Reach out to the executive director of Power Clean Future Ohio and learn, hey, I pay taxes here. I'm a member of this community. Why aren't they involved? This issue is really important to me. There's nothing more, we can go and pitch this to mayors all day long, but it's nothing more powerful than them saying, I had 2 calls about this. What do you guys do? Who are you? Because that's really, it's going to open the door for a conversation more than us just sending over an email and an invitation to Zoom.
Thank you, Leah. Dr. Hussein?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point that Leah brought up. I'd say that's a great first step too. And I think the education part, right? That just even I've learned so much from Leah, just, and I feel like I was already informed, but just, you learn every day, right? And so I'd say too, even so I know I mentioned a lot of advocacy, but even talking with your religious groups, right? With your church, your synagogue, your mosque, wherever, your temple, talking to your friends, just, whoever you hang out with, just throwing in like, hey, I heard this presentation about climate change. What do you think? Right? Just getting the conversation started. And then knowing that if you don't have all the answers, and not all of us do, that who you can reach out to, right? You can reach out to, again, Ohio Climate Justice Fund, right? Power for a Clean, Healthy Future for, I just messed that up. Power, for a Clean, Healthy Ohio, I think, right? Or for
Clean Future Ohio. Yep.
Clean Future, that's right. I mixed around the future part. So yeah, education. I think honestly, that's the best thing. And then you realize how many people are actually interested. And then you can learn the barriers are to like, what is preventing them from going further, the next step to advocacy. And then, you can overcome that just once you get this group. So yeah.
The other question I would have of both of you, have either of you worked with state legislators in Ohio to look at developing a climate change, clean energy, or environmental justice caucus?
I'll let you go, Leah, first.
Oh, no. I'm connected, and Climate Justice Fund is connected to several advocacy groups who are trying to work together to really draft what we would call our environmental justice bill, right? We have great examples of what can happen from partners over in Illinois. If you all have been following their act, the acronym was CEJA, Clean Energy Justice Act. And so we're really looking at places like that to say, okay, now how did they make that happen? I'll give you a key. Part of what Illinois did was listen, lead, share. And so that's why we're bringing it to Ohio and hoping to bring it, whoever else wants to jump in so we can have some synergy, but not directly, no.
Yeah, I'd say probably, yeah, agreed. I think there is at the Bird Polar Research Center that I had mentioned, they do a lot of community engagement. And part of what they try to come up with was an emergency preparedness plan for the city of Columbus, at least in Franklin County. And so as part of that, so they were talking about that, and they had to change it during when COVID-19 first came up last year, because their plan for excess heat was to open up, like swimming pools, like centers for people to get water, and obviously everything's shut down. And so I'm not sure if there's an EJ component, right, to the plan that they had, but I think that would be another great intersection point. And Leo, it'd be great to work with you on that and just, get more OCGF out there more as well too, and these people's mindsets.
I think certainly the synergy from both of your organizations and many more are very much needed, and I certainly want to be a part of, because it really does connect with better health outcomes if we have a cleaner environment, if we have people living away from power plants and toxins, manufacturing that's polluting the air and the water. So certainly that's something I would want to be, and Primary One Health. And Leah, just to share with you and for our listening audience, Primary One Health and every federally qualified health center in America is required to have 51% of our board members are patients, the very people that we serve. And I'm proud to say that more than 60% of our board members are people of color. And this organization is led by an African-American woman. So we believe in the people's voice. The people are deciding how the money is spent. Our board members decide where we're going to be located, our hours of operations, the services that we provide. They have to sign off on any grant or MOU that we enter into with any other organization. So we really like the model. It came out of the war on poverty back in the 60s, that the mantra was nothing about us or for us without us.
Yeah.
And so I see the like mission, the like voices that your organization is promoting. And I think that's the way all organizations should go if we really want to provide the service we say and to the people we say we want to serve. I do want to share a couple of items, and then I want to see if there's anything more either one of you want to share, and then if there are any questions or any community events that are coming up that anyone from our listening audience, I'll be glad when we get back to live and in-person quarterly leadership advocacy breakfast, because one of the reasons we have these is that we want to build the synergy in our community with like-minded people, but also to share what's going on, share promising practices. That's why we have these, so that members of our community can get to know each other, get to know other organizations in the community, different strategies that are being employed by community members, and events that each and every one that attends can share. The other reason we hold these, and we have them as quarterly community health advocacy breakfast forums, is because we want to share it over a meal. And we want to invite a small racial, ethnic, or cultural community business that provides food to bring that food so we can expose their small minority, racial, ethnic, or cultural business to the broader community. We also have them at different locations so that we're exposing different community assets to the community as well. So they're multi-purpose quarterly community health advocacy breakfast to bring these topics to individuals, but also to expose our communities to these assets in our community and these small businesses in our community. That's the only way we're going to help each other and help to grow whatever movement we decide we want to grow. I do want to share that Primary One Health is the oldest and largest federally qualified health center in Central Ohio. We're not the oldest in the state of Ohio. Our friends up in Cleveland, Neon, hold that title. But we are a sister organization here in Central Ohio and work with the other, I believe it's 57 community health centers and lookalikes in the state of Ohio. We are doing our very best to vaccinate our community members. I would really encourage our racial, ethnic, and cultural communities, particularly those in our community, Black and Brown individuals who are bearing the burden of death and hospitalization and COVID-19, to text the word vaccine to 614-502-5329. We can set you up with an appointment to get your vaccine. You can come into our health centers. We do pop-up events. In fact, today at the Genesee Church of God from 9 until 12 at 1889 Genesee Avenue in Columbus in the Linden area. We're doing vaccinations from 9 until 12 noon. We will be doing another one on the week of the 26th with, it's an event that New Salem Baptist Church is having at the Maloney Park, again in the Linden area. And that's one of the areas that has been disproportionately impacted, and fewer residents have received their vaccines. And that's from 11 until 4 p.m. at the Maloney Park, which is part of the campus of St. Stephen's Community House, where Primary One Health has one of our 12 locations located in partnership with the Settlement House, St. Stephen's. Finally, I do want to share with the listening and viewing audience is that you can go to our website, primaryonehealth.org, to get more information on upcoming community leadership breakfasts, as well as other vaccine events, and look for some upcoming news in the very near future, in the next week or so, that'll be posted on that website. I want to give both of our speakers this morning an opportunity to share more information that you might want to share with the listening and viewing audience. Either one of you can go first.
Say, go ahead, Leah.
Again, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to share more about the Climate Justice Fund this morning. I really, really, really want to reiterate the point that this effort is not for organizations who have environmental missions, clean energy missions, or climate focused missions. You can be a faith-based institution, a healthcare provider, a youth development organization. We need all organizations to, one, understand that we all are in this environment, so it's all of our issue, and two, we all have equal voice. So again, I can empathize with all who may feel like, oh, this isn't my topic. Some who may not have even logged on today because the topic said environmental justice. But I want you to know that I have that same experience, and so we welcome all perspectives. Because what we want to be able to do is, even if you don't want to move forward with the grant application, to again have that community education piece be widespread. So thank you so much for the opportunity in this platform, and I hope we can all stay in touch as partners.
Absolutely. I definitely echo that. Yeah, thank you again. I just want to make two quick points that you had brought up to Senator Tavares, is that healthcare has had its dark history as well too, for the wrongs that it has done. And it's a very real history, and it's a dark history, unfortunately. And I know that there are a lot of good-hearted physicians that want to do the right thing now and correct those wrongs. The vaccines themselves for the COVID-19 ones, if anyone still has hesitancy, I know there's a lot to do. You don't know me, a lot of this stuff is about relationship building, but I do know it's something you can trust, and it's not like days of the past. And so hopefully that can help people as well. And we'll continue to do what we need to do to correct these past wrongs. And then the last thing I'll just say is that, again, like I mentioned in the beginning, when people come in sick, it's very hard, right, to look back at what happened to lead to all of this. And in that process, it's very uncomfortable to go back and think about how much did I smoke? Where did I go? Who were my family? It's very emotional. And a lot of this environmental justice work, I think, is emotional, because we all have a dark past history as this country. And you're going to head up against things that you don't want to hear, and truths that are just hurt and that are awful. And I think the only way to heal is to acknowledge them, to just say it was real, that systemic racism is real. If I did not make that clear in my PowerPoint, systemic racism is real, and it has health implications. And I see that every day. And so does every other physician, even though we may not code it that way, that's what's happening. And climate change is real. It's having environmental impacts inequitably, and that's just not right anymore. We have to do something, and we can. And so I'm so grateful that Primary One brought this opportunity for us to speak about this, and to Amy and to Leah, and we're definitely going to continue this forward. I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
Well, thank you both. And for Amy in her absence, we want to thank SWACO for being a part of today's Environmental Justice Forum. I definitely want to stay in touch with both of you, and want to talk to you both about writing for a very strong Central Ohio news journal, the Columbus Dayton African American, to do a regular column on environmental justice and actions that we can all take, because it is critical that we do our very best. And certainly those of us who are bearing the burden of injustice with environmental toxins and water and air, et cetera, that we do our part, but then we push others to do what they should do that is right, fair, and just. So thank you both. Have a wonderful weekend. And then for our listening and viewing audience, we will be celebrating Juneteenth as our paid holiday here at Primary One Health next Friday. So we will not have health care being provided next Friday, but we would encourage everyone to go to a Juneteenth celebration to learn more about the history of America and the lack of knowledge about the freedoms of African Americans. Thank you all, and we'll see you next quarter.